You're probably best known for your large-scale sculptural works, but this exhibition focuses on 2 series of drawings. How significant is drawing within your practice?
Drawing has always been the central point of my work. I have a very special and very kind of important relationship with drawing. It's so immediate and direct, and that's what I like about drawing, is the intimacy and the immediacy of drawing. Is, you know, you can really work on it really quickly, and so drawing has always been there for me in the background. I was very driven to becoming a painter, and something that I always say is that, you know, like how you never have a choice whether you want to be an artist or not, you just are one. Similarly, you know, like you can't really pick your medium picks you, and I had picked painting because that's what I really wanted to do, but painting never picked me, right? So it was just one of those things that it was a one-sided love for painting, and it never loved me back. So I was like, okay, you know, I can't paint. And also I really believe that I've got a really good eye for painting. I know what makes a good painting. And then I knew that I would never be able to achieve that, you know. And also I'm such an impatient person. I'm a really impatient bastard. I can't be sitting there and trying to make a good painting for the rest of my life, which will probably never happen. So I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to do that, and I'll try something else. And then I shifted my focus to drawing, and drawing immediately worked. You know, I discovered that it was a two-side love. You know, it was a two-way thing, and it worked. So that's when I started drawing. This was going back in my student days when I was still in my undergrad. And yeah, drawing is interesting. Drawing is almost like handwriting. You know, there's nothing more special than a handwritten letter. And I think drawing is like that. You know, it's like a handwritten idea that you articulate through this medium. And I think that there's something very special about that. But then, you know, as I kind of progressed through my art education, I was still very adamant of being a painter, and I went to the Slade on the painting department. And funnily enough, Slade made me very anti-painting. You know, I did not make a single painting while I was at the Slade, whereas I kind of then branched out into a more of a sculptural realm. And I think that sculpture is more, it's more my thing, you know, the physicality of it and how it defines gravity and it shares the same space as you're in. All of these things were really exciting for me as an artist, and it's like, okay, so, you know, let's not worry about not being a painter, and let's focus on what I can do. So since that point, I really focused on actually making physical objects and things that could be in this space that I am in. And also, I'm not a very confident person, so what sculpture also does is that it kind of gives me that space to hide behind it, you know, because I kind of, you know, if something goes wrong, I can just hide behind my sculpture, and it's like, this is it, this is all you get, and I kind of don't have much to say about it. And that's great, you know, that's fantastic, because it kind of fills in my space. It takes over my space, you know, fantastic. And whereas painting can't do that, you know, I have to physically stand in front of the painting and then take the ownership. And as not, like I said, as not being a very confident person, I couldn't bear the idea of standing in front of something and taking the ownership. Whereas I think that the work has to take its own ownership and its own ground. You know, it needs to be there, you know, with big balls and say that this is it. You know, I am the work, and you should look at me and forget about the author, the maker. You know, let's just.
You're standing in front of a work now, but there is a big
Yes.
physicality about it, and it's almost as if you're kind of in the work.
Yes.
In a way.
So after I would say nearly 7-8 years, I have finally decided to look back in my work and really focus on two-dimensional works. And I talked about that, how I can never be a good painter, but drawing is something that I'm passionate about, but also I'd like to think that I'm very good at it. Like I've got the craftsman's like skill of making a good drawing, and my style of drawing is more sort of less figurative but more realistic. You know, it's got that sort of realism to it, and it's got that believability about it. You know, you believe the image that you're looking at. So I only recently, in like last 2 years, that I've really become closer to drawing, and I rediscovered charcoal for the first time since school. You know, when they used to make you do life drawing in class, and you hated it. I hated life drawing, the charcoal and all of that, and it just like didn't work for me. And since then, I never picked up charcoal or anything of that reminded me of that time ever again. And it was only like 2 years ago that I was a bit stuck. You know, when you have those moments that you don't really know what to do, and it was that, and I came across it was just a small piece of charcoal in my studio just lying around somewhere. I picked it up, and there was a plywood in my studio, and I rubbed it on that. And actually, even before I saw the result, just the sound that it made, you know, it was so seductive. You know, it sucked me right in. It was like, fucking hell, like this is fantastic. The sound that it made, you know, that sort of, that hisky, that sort of rubbing sound that it made, it was fantastic. And it's like, I got really excited about that sound initially, even before I could actually physically work on the medium itself. And then that was it. There was no looking back. I'm just like, whoa, I just rediscovered charcoal. And then charcoal has become my thing like recently. And I can't stop rubbing charcoal everywhere.
So does this series use charcoal?
It's all charcoal.
But it's also brick dust.
It's okay. So coming on to that, actually, you talked about the fact that I was standing in front of it. So let me just say that how terrified and petrified I was of this decision of doing a drawing-only show. So every show that I've done to date has had a central piece of like a sculptural central piece. That was my focus, and then the drawings in the show, they were less of drawings but more of platforms that were providing this kind of they were providing like a hanging point for my sculptures. You know, that was what they were the purpose that they were serving at the time. And only recently that I was working on these drawings, and with the new material that I've just discovered, which I'm totally obsessed with, which is brick dust, and I'll go on to talking about that more later. But with the brick dust providing as a base, the foundation of the drawing, and the charcoal on top, and then when we walk around it, you'll see the edges, they're so tactile and fresh and juicy, and you know they're very sculptural. You know, so actually, even the drawings, I think of them as more physical and more sculptural than more flat works on the wall. You know, so that was the way kind of forward for me. It's like, okay, no, I can do a drawing only show, but I can think of them as more sculptural pieces rather than flat works on the wall. So it was I think it was a real brave step for me to go ahead and do a drawing only show, because then there's no room for error. You know, there's nothing to hide behind.
Tell me about the actual process behind so the brick dust, the charcoal, and it's on wood, right?
Yes, it is on wood. So I did a whole series of drawings where I was just drawing with charcoal directly on plywood. So I had these big monumental plywood panels, and it was just the direct sort of application of the charcoal on top of that. And I did that, and it worked really well, because I thought that it was interesting how materiality and color became one in that series, where the grain of the wood was actually contributing into the image itself. It was becoming part of the landscape that I was drawing or in the works, and also the fact that, you know, charcoal is burnt wood, and then I was rubbing that on wood itself, and there was something nice about the circularity of the materiality in those works, and then again, I talked about the fact that I'm a very impatient person, and then I felt that I resolved that body work, and it didn't come to a dead end. I could have carried on doing more of them, which was very exciting, but they were becoming almost like a recipe, a method, and there's nothing worse than that. When an artwork becomes a method and you just follow it blindly, then what's the fun or surprise in that? And so I have to carry on trying out different things and see how I can go that extra mile with an idea. And the fact that I'm just I've just finished making a big body of work, Places for Nowhere, for Victoria, which was all about the alienation of landscape and looking at the portability of the landscape, and how time and memory play tricks on your mind and the landscape, and how you kind of, what you think you remember really well, you don't actually at all, because when you go and revisit that place, it's not at all what you thought it was. So there was a real sense of mystery and this otherness to the images of the mind, and when I thought about how do I convey that or articulate these ideas in the work, and I was like, I have to make them look alien. I have to make them look as if you were looking at a different planet altogether, and through a lot of research, I came across brick dust for the first time ever, and I immediately fell in love with it. The color, the texture, the smell, it was amazing. So brick dust became the material for me to use for that body of work, Places for Nowhere. That's a big sculptural piece. And then because I was so excited about it, it's like, well, surely there's got to be a way for me to bring that into my drawings, the material. And then I kind of a lot of experimenting, and then I came across, I kind of came up with the idea that instead of drawing on the wood, why don't I start making pigment, but instead of using pigment, I use brick dust instead. So like how you make acrylic paint, you have pigment and you have the medium, either water resoluble or the oil resoluble, and you mix it in with that. So I had all of this medium, but instead of pigment, I was just adding brick dust to the mixture, and I was making my own paint, but using brick dust, which was, again, I thought was really exciting, and the color of it, when you make that mixture, the richness of the color, it was so tempting to eat it. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if you ever did any printmaking in college. Like when you do the screen printing, and that juicy, the paint, when you kind of flow it, when you kind of pull it across, I just want to pick that up and eat it, and it was that feeling, So I knew that I was onto something here, and yes, so the next step was, how do I then apply it onto the wooden panels? So then I had to thicken the mixture, so it becomes like a plaster almost, like a really thick, gooey putty almost. And then they were being plastered. That mixture was then being plastered onto the panels. That's what gives me the foundation, the initial layer, the surface for me to kind of work from. So then the next step is, then obviously that has to wait and dry out fully, and then I think about what I want to do as a piece, what I want to make, and so I never do any sketches, any planning, like physical planning. It has to be, it's all mental. I know that there's going to be a certain, like some hill there and some sort of open deserted landscape here, and that's all mental work, and then I just go at it and I just get it out. So and then the first step is that I have a series of buckets, which with a diluted Indian ink. So there's very watery, and then medium, and then very dense sort of Indian ink, and then it's with a piece of a towel, like a rough cloth. I dip it in the Indian ink, and I map out the drawing, the composition really quickly. So that's very immediate, that has to happen. Impulsive, it's that very sort of initial attempt into getting that image out, and it has to come out as quickly as possible. Because if I stop and think, then I'm kind of making it up as I go, but I have to get that image that I started with out there, So that's what I do. So once the image has been mapped out with the Indian ink, then that has to dry out, and then it's just me and the charcoal and the surface, and I just go crazy with the charcoal and rubbing it. Even when something is done, I just can't stop rubbing it. It's just so satisfying. There's something so satisfying about rubbing charcoal onto a surface, and it gives you this sort of shimmery, velvety, soft texture that I've managed to achieve in the drawings, and there's certain dryness, there's certain sort of powdery, sort of luminescent to the drawings. That's what I was kind of really digging for, and I got there. So yeah, then that's the process in which these drawings go through.
And they're drawn partly from real landscapes that you've remembered, but also from imagination. So you're creating I think you've used the term mindscape.
Okay, absolutely. So I talk about all of these drawings and even the recent sculptural series as mindscapes. And that's because, yes, these are now drawings and physical landscapes because we can see that they're there, but so they're kind of in the physical realm, but they are of the mind, but they're the mindscapes. They come from within. They're not geographically possible, but these are the landscapes of the mind. And that's why I kind of I talk about them as mindscapes, because that's really important. These are fantasy places, that I've kind of collected. So each drawing or each image has several geographical places compressed into one. So these could be places that I've traveled to, lived in, passed by, came across the images of randomly. So, I would just remember these places, and then the idea is that I would somehow try and put them all together in this one image. The whole body of work could have taken a more figurative, more sort of abstract direction, which would have been possibly equally successful, because it would have had its own sort of language. But I'm more interested in making almost a photographic image.
I was going to say there's a very big photographic element. They look almost as if they are somehow negatives or taken from a photograph.
Yes, and I think what's interesting is that I've discovered that this particular process that I go through of the dabbing or the rubbing of the ink before, which brick dust absorbs really quickly. As soon as I put a big kind of drop on the surface, it just gets sucked in like straight away, it just sucks it in. And it gives you a really fuzzy sort of a mark without sort of any sharp edges to it. And I think that when I then build on top of that using the charcoal, that's what gives it that photographic sort of element to it. I think that's what happens.
So talking about memory, and you've just mentioned your sculptural public artwork at Victoria Places of Nova.
Yes.
That is working with other people's memories of place.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you collected those memories and who from?
Absolutely, yes. So I did actually before that, my first solo show at the Gazelli Art House was titled Other Crescents, Other Moons, which was a show of sculptures, and they were of, again, mindscapes, but I was at the time I was working predominantly with my own memory, and I was trying to, without any visual references, I was trying to materialize a certain place that I would recall, and there was a the whole series of works where I was making these miniature landscapes, um, in sort of in wood or any kind of material that I could find. But at the time, I was painting them out all in black paint, or I was kind of scorching them, which was really important because I was trying to achieve a three-dimensional silhouette, like this dream spiral thing that you kind of recognize, but you can't quite get it because it's removed, you know. So that was the kind of the body work that I did at the time, and I thought that I was really fascinated by that, the process and the way it kind of became a thing of its own, you know. So those landscapes were neither real nor they were imagined. They kind of took on this middle. They were hovering in the middle between the two, and I always knew that project has juice left in it. You know, it had that extra mileage that I could have gone. And then more recently, I was approached to make a proposal for a public a commission in Victoria, and as soon as that kind of came to me, I immediately picked up on that Other Crescents of the Moon series, and it's like, fantastic, this is my time to go that extra mile with that particular body of work. So that's when I then opened the project up to other people. So I was then no longer kind of, my memories were no longer important. Then I was inviting other people to donate a memory, a fragment of a landscape that was significant to them. And the only condition that I would set was that they should no longer have access to it. And that could be either because they've moved away, or the landscape itself has evolved into something else with time. Again, when you think about London and the success of London, why London is what it is because, you know, we are a true multicultural society. You know, everybody comes from all around the world, and we live in harmony. You know, it's very good. You know, it's that perfect example. And I think that what's interesting is that how London has become, and the cultural landscape of London has only become because everybody has had their contribution. You know, everybody kind of contributed their kind of little cultural landscape. Do you know what I mean? You know, and I thought so for me it was really important to highlight that in the work and let's celebrate the kind of the universality of London. So the idea was to then bring all of these stories together and to make a universal sort of panoramic landscape, mindscape. You know, so that's where the idea came from. What's interesting is that you know, the more stories that I got to hear, the more, you know, it was interesting how people remembered things, you know, and you know, like when I would ask of certain details, they couldn't remember them. They couldn't remember the details, but they know it was there, and it was anything. You know, it could be an architectural feature, it could be a tree, it could be a big rock that they used to sit on. I mean, anything. You know, it was. But they knew they know the outlines of the story of that, but not the details. You know, and I thought that was really fascinating. You know, it was, and that had to be then reflected into the project. And I talk about how, you know, the work is not a model making project. It's not about being a slave to detail, and it's about telling these stories, and it's about how they can be married together and through my vision. Do you see what I mean? Like so then every story that I would get, it would have to be reimagined through my mind, but then woven through together, all these stories together, and that's what I do. You know, that's what I've been able to do.
And you were working purely from descriptions given to
purely from description, and I was very particular about not giving any and not being given any visual reference at all. And I think what's worth highlighting is the fact that even if the person who donated the memory would come back to see the work and they would say that this looks nothing like what I described, for me that's irrelevant, you know, because what was important was the fact that they gave me that story and that landscape, because and that was a trigger that then offsets the process of making the sculpture, because without the story, there would be no sculpture, right? So, and then the piece has to then stand its own ground, and it has to tell its own story. And that's what's more important, not the story of the person. As long as I know that the story is in there, and they know the story is in there, but whether they recognize themselves in it or not, that for me is slightly irrelevant. It would be nice if they did, but it's not the end of the world if they didn't. And that was really important. Like similarly with the drawing show, like all of these are timeless landscapes. Time is not important, scale is not important. The piece behind me, you know, what the hell is that? I don't know. You know, we could be looking at an aerial view of this huge span of land, or we could just be looking at the ground, you know. I don't know, or we could just be looking at the water surface, a surface of the sea. And I like that ambiguity, I like that tension of not knowing exactly where you are, what the fuck is happening in this world, you know? And that's what I wanted to carry through into the sculptures. I like that. I find it so fascinating. It's like, so it's again looking at how time and memory affect the landscape, you know. It's like what you remember or what you thought you remembered, it was nothing like that in reality, you know, and that's really important. And the fact that time is a funny bugger thing, isn't it? You know, it's a total illusion. You know, it's like when you're having a good time, time flies, and then there are other times that, you know, 2 hours later, you look at your time and it's like, oh my God, it's only 5 minutes ago that it's just an illusion. Time is just nothing but a perception of the mind. And the fact that it's a man-made thing, you know, time is just a tool to measure change. That's just crazy, you know, and we've just titled it time. That's just kind of irrelevant. And also, one thing that I always kind of think about when I've made these works, or even Places for Nowhere, is the theory of time. You know, we've got two predominant theories of time, the linear and cyclic theory of time. You know, the fact that everything kind of comes back in a circle, or you just move forward and nothing kind of comes back again. But whereas my work kind of marries these two theories together, and time is like this fabric, right, that covers everything, and every minute, every second that goes by, you know, you have a layer and it changes everything, and you know, you just move on. But the whole body of work gives you that chance to peel these layers off again and look at something in its totality. You know, let's just forget about time and let's look at it all together. I think that's what's so magical about the art world, that everything is possible. You know, what more do you want? You know, it's like, yeah.